Emma Rivera thought she had buried her past, until an unexpected invitation to a meeting brings up old wounds. Forced to confront the professor who nearly destroyed her dreams, she discovers a shocking truth that could change everything. Must Emma face her traumas and make choices that could redefine her future? Don't blink, or you might miss the controversial twist in this thrilling story. Welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Emma Rivera's fingers hovered over her keyboard, frozen in midair as her eyes fixed on the email that had just popped up in her inbox. The subject line read, "Oakwood High 20-year reunion. You're invited." Her heart skipped a beat, a mixture of nostalgia and dread washing over her. At 38, Emma had built a successful career as a graphic designer in the heart of Chicago. Her loft apartment overlooked the bustling streets of the Loop, its walls adorned with her own artwork and the accolades she'd earned over the years. But in this moment, surrounded by the trappings of her adult success, she felt like that insecure 18-year-old girl again. With a deep breath, she clicked open the email. The cheerful message inside contrasted sharply with the turmoil in her mind. "Dear Emma, time flies. It's been 20 years since we walked the halls of Oakwood High, and we're excited to invite you to our reunion on Saturday, June 15th. Join us for an evening of memories, laughter, and reconnection at the Skyline Loft. RSVP by May 1st. We can't wait to see you. Best, the reunion committee." Emma's finger hovered over the delete button. 20 years had passed, but the memory of her last day at Oakwood High still stung. Mr. Lawson's words echoed in her mind. "Ms. Rivera, if this is the best you can do, perhaps a career in the arts isn't for you." The public humiliation in front of her entire AP history class had nearly derailed her dreams. Her phone buzzed, startling her out of the memory. It was a text from her best friend, Sophia. "Em, did you get the reunion invite? Are you going?" Emma sighed, typing back, "Just got it. Not sure I want to relive high school drama." Sophia's response was swift. "Come on, it's been 20 years. Time to show them how far you've come. Besides, I heard Mr. Lawson retired last year. He might not even be there." Emma's thumb paused over the screen. The thought of facing her old classmates, and potentially Mr. Lawson, made her stomach churn. But a small part of her, the part that had fought to prove herself all these years, whispered that maybe it was time to confront the past. Her gaze drifted to the framed magazine cover on her wall, her first major design project that had launched her career. She'd come so far from that crushed teenager. Maybe Sophia was right. Maybe it was time to show the world, and herself, just how far she'd come. With trembling fingers, Emma typed her response. "You're right, let's do this. I'll RSVP yes." As she hit send, a mix of excitement and anxiety bubbled up inside her. She turned back to her computer, moving the cursor away from the delete button and hovering over reply. Taking a deep breath, she began to type her RSVP. The rest of the day passed in a blur of client meetings and design revisions, but the reunion invitation lingered in the back of Emma's mind. As she walked home that evening, the bustling city streets seemed to mirror her internal tumult. The setting sun cast long shadows across the urban landscape, reminding her of the shadows her past still cast on her present. At home, Emma poured herself a glass of wine and stepped out onto her small balcony. The city lights twinkled below, a testament to the vibrant life she'd built for herself. Yet, as she sipped her wine, she couldn't shake the feeling that by agreeing to attend the reunion, she'd opened a door to her past that couldn't be easily closed. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through old photos, pausing on one from her high school graduation. Her smile in the picture was forced, her eyes betraying the hurt and uncertainty she'd felt that day. "Things are different now," she whispered to herself, a mantra she'd repeated countless times over the years. As the night deepened, Emma made a decision. She would attend the reunion not as the wounded girl she once was, but as the accomplished woman she'd become. It was time to face her past, to confront the ghosts that had haunted her for 2 decades. With newfound resolve, she went back inside and opened her laptop. She had 6 weeks until the reunion, 6 weeks to prepare herself mentally and emotionally for whatever lay ahead. As she began to research her old classmates online, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this reunion would be more than just a trip down memory lane. It would be a turning point, a chance for closure, and perhaps an opportunity for a new beginning. Little did she know, as she delved into the digital footprints of her past, that the reunion would bring far more than she ever anticipated. setting in motion a series of events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her past, her present, and her future. The harsh fluorescent lights of Oakwood High's history classroom flickered, casting an unflattering glow over the sea of anxious faces. 18-year-old Emma Rivera sat rigid in her chair, her heart pounding as Mr. Lawson, the AP history teacher, made his way down the aisle, returning their final projects. "This project," Mr. Lawson's voice boomed, "was your chance to demonstrate everything you've learned this year. Some of you rose to the challenge. Others—" His eyes landed on Emma, and she felt her cheeks burn. "Others clearly need to reconsider their priorities." He placed Emma's project on her desk, the red C glaring up at her. Emma's vision blurred with unshed tears as she stared at the grade, her dreams of art school seeming to crumble before her eyes. "Ms. Rivera," Mr. Lawson's voice cut through the silence, "I expected more from you. If this is the best you can do, perhaps a career in the arts isn't for you." The memory faded, and Emma found herself back in her Chicago loft, her hand trembling as she set down her coffee mug. 20 years had passed, but the sting of that moment remained fresh. She glanced at her current project spread across her drafting table, a campaign for a major tech company that could catapult her career to new heights. Despite her success, a part of her still heard Mr. Lawson's words echoing in her mind. Across town, in a modest suburban home, Thomas Lawson sat in his study, surrounded by mementos of his 30-year teaching career. His eyes fell on a framed photo of his last class at Oakwood High, taken just before his retirement the previous year. Among the smiling faces, he noticed one missing, Emma Rivera. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He remembered that day, the harsh words he'd spoken, the look of devastation on Emma's face. It wasn't his finest moment as an educator, and the memory had haunted him for years. Thomas sighed heavily, running a hand through his now gray hair. That year had been particularly challenging for him. His wife had been diagnosed with cancer. The school board was pressuring teachers to improve AP test scores, and he'd been struggling with his own sense of burnout. None of these were excuses, he knew, but they had contributed to his short temper and harsh judgment. He reached for the reunion invitation on his desk. As a retired teacher, he'd been invited to attend, to celebrate with the students whose lives he'd been a part of. But could he face them, knowing the impact his words might have had? Thomas's mind wandered back to that fateful day. He remembered picking up Emma's project, expecting greatness from one of his brightest students. But the work had seemed rushed, lacking the depth and creativity he knew she was capable of. Disappointment and frustration had gotten the better of him, and he'd lashed out. What he hadn't known then was that Emma had been dealing with her own struggles. Her mother had been in and out of the hospital, and Emma had been working part-time to help support her family. These details had come to light only after graduation, leaving Thomas with a heavy burden of regret. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across his study, Thomas made a decision. He would attend the reunion, not to relive past glories, but to make amends. He owed it to Emma, and to himself, to try to right the wrong of 20 years ago. Meanwhile, in her loft, Emma found herself scrolling through her high school yearbook, her finger tracing the younger version of herself in the photos. She'd been so full of dreams then, despite the challenges she'd faced. Her mother's illness, the financial struggles, the pressure to excel. It had all culminated in that disastrous history project. Emma's gaze fell on a photo of Mr. Lawson, his stern expression a stark contrast to the smiling students around him. For years she'd carried anger towards him, blaming him for nearly derailing her dreams. But now, with the perspective of time, she wondered if there was more to the story than she'd realized as a teenager. As the day waned, both Emma and Thomas found themselves lost in reflection, unaware that their paths were destined to cross again, bringing with it the potential for understanding, forgiveness, and unexpected new beginnings. The weeks leading up to the reunion passed in a flurry of activity for Emma. By day, she threw herself into her work, pouring her anxieties into her designs. By night, she found herself lost in a rabbit hole of social media, scrutinizing the lives of former classmates. One evening, as the city lights blinked to life outside her window, Emma sat cross-legged on her couch, sketchpad in hand. Her pencil moved almost of its own accord, bringing to life the swirling emotions she couldn't quite verbalize. On the page, abstract shapes morphed into a familiar face. Mr. Lawson's, surrounded by a maelstrom of shadowy forms. Emma's phone buzzed, startling her. It was Sophia again. "Hey, Em, what are you wearing to the reunion? Want to go shopping this weekend?" The thought of choosing an outfit suddenly felt overwhelming. What does one wear to face their past? Emma's reply was non-committal. "Not sure yet. Maybe something I already have." Sophia's response was swift and determined. "No way. We're going shopping. Saturday, 2 p.m. No excuses." Emma smiled despite her anxiety. Sophia's enthusiasm was infectious, a welcome distraction from her swirling thoughts. As she returned to her sketch, Emma realized that facing Mr. Lawson wasn't her only concern. What about her old crush, David? Or Lisa, the girl who'd always seemed to have it all together? How would they perceive her now? Across town, Thomas Lawson was facing his own set of anxieties. He sat at his desk, a blank notepad before him, attempting to craft the perfect apology to Emma. Every sentence he wrote felt inadequate, unable to convey the depth of his regret. "Dear Emma," he wrote for the 100th time, "I owe you an apology for my words 20 years ago. He trailed off, crumpling the paper and tossing it into an already overflowing wastebasket. Thomas leaned back in his chair, removing his glasses to rub his tired eyes. How could he explain that his harsh words had come from a place of his own pain and stress? How could he make amends without seeming self-serving? He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number for Janet, a fellow retired teacher. After a moment's hesitation, he pressed call. "Janet, it's Thomas. I need your advice about the reunion." As the day of the reunion drew nearer, both Emma and Thomas found their anxieties mounting. Emma channeled her nervous energy into a personal art project, creating a series of paintings that reflected her journey from that hurt teenager to the woman she was today. Each brushstroke was an act of catharsis, helping her process her emotions. Thomas, guided by Janet's advice, decided to write a general letter of apology to be shared at the reunion, addressing any student he might have hurt or discouraged over the years. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The night before the reunion, Emma stood before her mirror, smoothing down the dress she and Sophia had chosen. It was elegant yet comfortable, projecting the confidence of the successful woman she'd become. But as she met her own gaze in the reflection, she saw a flicker of that uncertain teenager. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, squaring her shoulders. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you're not that girl anymore." Across the city, Thomas placed his letter in his jacket pocket, his hand lingering over it, as if drawing strength from its presence. Tomorrow would be a day of reckoning, a chance for redemption, and perhaps an opportunity for new understanding. As the city settled into night, both Emma and Thomas lay awake, their minds racing with possibilities of what the reunion might bring. Little did they know that fate had plans that would exceed anything they could have imagined. The Skyline loft buzzed with excitement as former Oakwood High students filtered in, their chatter filling the air with a mix of nostalgia and nervous energy. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the Chicago skyline, the fading sunlight casting a golden glow over the gathering. Emma stood just outside the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest. She smoothed down her dress for the 100th time, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. Sophia, ever the supportive friend, gave her arm a reassuring squeeze. "You look amazing, Em. Ready to show them how far you've come?" Emma nodded, mustering a smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." With a deep breath, they stepped into the loft. The room was a sea of familiar yet changed faces. Name tags adorned lapels and dresses, helping bridge the gap that 2 decades had created. Emma's eyes darted around, a part of her still searching for Mr. Lawson despite her best efforts to appear nonchalant. "Emma? Emma Rivera, is that you?" She turned to see David Chen, her old crush, approaching with a wide smile. Time had been kind to him, adding distinguished lines around his eyes but leaving his boyish charm intact. "David, yes, it's me," Emma replied, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. They exchanged a brief hug, the awkwardness of their shared history hanging between them. "You look great," David said, his eyes taking in her appearance. "I heard you became a graphic designer? That's fantastic." As Emma began to respond, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found herself face to face with Lisa Patel, the former class president who had always seemed to have it all together. "Emma! Oh my God, your dress is gorgeous!" Lisa gushed, pulling her into a hug. "We have so much catching up to do." As the three of them fell into conversation, Emma felt some of her anxiety begin to ebb. They shared stories of career successes, family updates, and the inevitable challenges of adult life. Emma found herself relaxing, realizing that everyone else was just as human, just as vulnerable as she was. Across the room, Thomas Lawson entered quietly, his presence initially unnoticed amidst the excited reunions taking place. He scanned the crowd, a mixture of pride and regret washing over him as he recognized his former students, now successful adults in their own right. His eyes landed on Emma, engaged in animated conversation with her former classmates. The sight of her, confident and poised, sent a pang of guilt through him. The weight of the apology letter in his pocket seemed to grow heavier. As the evening progressed, Emma found herself swept up in a whirlwind of reconnections. She laughed at old jokes, marveled at how much and how little had changed, and slowly felt the walls she'd built around her high school memories begin to crumble. It was during a lull in the conversations that Emma finally spotted Mr. Lawson. He stood near the windows, looking out at the city, a solitary figure amidst the jovial crowd. The sight of him sent a jolt through her system, a mixture of old hurt and new curiosity. Before she could decide whether to approach him, the reunion organizer clinked a glass, calling for everyone's attention. "Welcome, class of 2003. We have a special surprise for you tonight. In the spirit of reconnection and growth, we've organized a collaborative art project. You'll be paired up to create something that represents your journey since high school. We'll display the finished pieces at the end of the night." A murmur of excitement and nervousness rippled through the crowd. Emma felt a spark of interest. Art was her element, after all. But her momentary enthusiasm was quickly dampened by the organizer's next words. "We've taken the liberty of creating the pairs. When I call your names, please find your partner." Emma half listened as names were called out. Her mind still on Mr. Emma's heart nearly stopped when she heard her name called. Emma Rivera and Thomas Lawson. The room seemed to fall silent around her, though the chatter continued unabated. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting Mr. Lawson's across the room. He looked as shocked as she felt, his usually composed face betraying a mix of surprise and what Emma thought might be hope. With trembling legs, Emma made her way towards her former teacher. Mr. Lawson took a few steps forward, meeting her halfway. "Ms. Rivera," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. "It's been a long time." Emma nodded, struggling to find her voice. "Mr. Lawson, I didn't expect to see you here." An awkward silence fell between them, years of unspoken words and emotions creating an almost tangible barrier. Mr. Lawson cleared his throat, clearly as uncomfortable as Emma felt. "I suppose we should." He gestured towards the art supplies that had been set up on tables around the room. "Right," Emma replied, grateful for the distraction. They made their way to an empty table, neither quite sure how to bridge the gap between them. As they stood before the blank canvas, paintbrushes in hand, Emma felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Here she was, a successful artist in her own right, about to create alongside the very person who had once made her doubt her abilities. Mr. Lawson seemed to sense her unease. "Emma," he began, his use of her first name startling her. "I know this is unexpected. Perhaps we could use this opportunity to clear the air?" Emma looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in 20 years. The stern teacher of her memories had been replaced by an older man, his face lined with years of experience, his eyes holding a warmth she'd never noticed before. I think I'd like that," she found herself saying, surprising even herself with her willingness to open this long-closed door. As they began to sketch out ideas for their collaborative piece, the initial awkwardness slowly began to dissipate. They spoke tentatively at first, about safe topics like the weather and the changes in Chicago over the years. But as their artwork began to take shape, so too did a new understanding between them. Around them, the reunion continued in full swing. Old friends laughed over shared memories, former rivals buried hatchets, and new connections were forged. But for Emma and Mr. Lawson, the world had narrowed to their shared canvas and the careful dance of reconciliation they were beginning to navigate. As the night wore on, Emma found herself relaxing, her brushstrokes becoming more confident. Mr. Lawson, she discovered, had a keen eye for composition, and together they were creating something unexpected and beautiful. "You know, Mr. Lawson said during a lull in their work. "I've followed your career over the years. Your success. It's been a source of pride for me, even if I had no right to feel that way." Emma's brush paused mid-stroke. She looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider that perhaps there was more to the story of that fateful day than she had ever known. As they put the finishing touches on their artwork, Emma realized that this reunion had become far more than a trip down memory lane. It was becoming a journey of healing, of second chances, and of new beginnings. The night was still young, and as they stepped back to admire their creation, both Emma and Mr. Lawson sensed that their shared journey was only just beginning. As Emma and Mr. Lawson stood back from their canvas, the bustling sounds of the reunion faded into the background. Their collaborative piece was a striking blend of Emma's modern, bold style and Mr. Lawson's more traditional approach. It depicted a bridge spanning a turbulent river, with the Chicago skyline rising in the background. "It's quite something," Mr. Lawson murmured, his eyes tracing the lines they'd created together. Emma nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "The bridge," she said softly. "It represents connection," Mr. Lawson finished for her. "And perhaps reconciliation." Their eyes met, and Emma felt a shift in the air between them. The tension that had been present since the start of the evening began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Before they could delve deeper into the meaning behind their creation, the reunion organizer's voice cut through the chatter. "All right, everyone, it's time to unveil your collaborative masterpieces. Each pair will have a moment to present their work and share what it represents to them." A ripple of nervous excitement went through the room. Emma felt her heart rate quicken. Presenting her work was nothing new, but doing so alongside Mr. Lawson, in front of her former classmates, felt monumentally different. As other pairs presented their works, ranging from humorous caricatures to deeply emotional pieces, Emma found herself growing increasingly anxious. Mr. Lawson must have sensed her unease because he leaned in and whispered, "We've got this, Emma. Your talent speaks for itself." His words, meant to reassure, instead sparked a flare of the old hurt. "My talent," she whispered back, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "I thought a career in the arts wasn't for me." Mr. Lawson flinched as if he'd been struck. The weight of his past words hung heavy between them. But before he could respond, they heard their names called. "And now, let's see what Emma Rivera and Mr. Thomas Lawson have created." With a deep breath, Emma stepped forward, Mr. Lawson at her side. They carefully placed their canvas on the easel for all to see. A hush fell over the room as their classmates took in the powerful image. "Well," Emma began, her voice stronger than she felt, "our piece represents the journey we've all taken since high school. The river symbolizes the challenges and changes we've faced, while the bridge represents the connections that have brought us here tonight." Mr. Lawson nodded, adding, "The city skyline in the background represents our dreams and aspirations. Some of us have reached them, others are still on the journey, but they're always there, guiding us forward." As they spoke, Emma could feel the energy in the room shift. Her former classmates were nodding, some with tears in their eyes, others with knowing smiles. She realized that their artwork had touched upon a universal truth, that life's journey is full of obstacles, but it's the bridges we build and the dreams we chase that define us. Just as they were about to step back, Mr. Lawson cleared his throat. "If I may," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'd like to add something." Emma looked at him surprised. This wasn't part of their plan. "This piece," Mr. Lawson continued, "also represents a personal journey for me. A journey of realizing past mistakes and seeking redemption." He turned to Emma, his eyes filled with remorse. "Emma, 20 years ago, I said something to you that was not only unprofessional but deeply hurtful. I've carried the weight of those words for 2 decades, and I owe you an apology." The room fell silent. Emma felt all eyes on her, but she could only focus on Mr. Lawson's sincere gaze. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Your talent was always evident, and my words came from a place of personal frustration that had nothing to do with you. I'm sorry for any doubt I may have planted in your mind. Your success is a testament to your resilience and incredible talent." Emma stood frozen, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through her. The hurt teenager inside her wanted to lash out, to reject this apology that came 2 decades too late. But the woman she'd become recognized the courage it took for Mr. Lawson to say these words publicly. As the silence stretched on, Emma realized that everyone was waiting for her response. This moment, she understood, would define not just her evening, but potentially her relationship with her past. With a deep breath, she prepared to respond, knowing her words would be a turning point in this unexpected journey of reconciliation. Emma took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Mr. Lawson's. The room around them seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in this pivotal moment. "Mr. Lawson," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I won't pretend that your words didn't affect me deeply. For years they echoed in my mind, challenging my confidence and my choices." She paused, glancing at their artwork. The bridge they had painted together seemed to take on new meaning. "But standing here today, I realized that those words also fueled a determination in me, a need to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I did belong in the world of art." Emma turned back to face her former teacher, her expression softening. "Your apology means more than you know, and while I can't erase the past, I think I'm ready to build a bridge over it." A collective exhale seemed to ripple through the room. Mr. Lawson's shoulders visibly relaxed, relief washing over his features. "Thank you, Emma," he said softly. "Your grace is as impressive as your talent." The reunion organizer, sensing the weight of the moment, stepped in. "Well, I think we can all agree that Emma and Mr. Lawson's piece and their words have captured the spirit of this reunion beautifully. Let's give them a round of applause." The room erupted in applause, the sound washing over Emma like a cleansing wave. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Sophia, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Em," Sophia whispered. As they stepped away from the spotlight, Emma felt lighter than she had in years. The burden she'd been carrying, the lingering doubt and resentment, seemed to have lifted. The rest of the evening took on a dreamlike quality. Former classmates approached Emma, sharing their own stories of struggles and triumphs. Many expressed how moved they were by the exchange between her and Mr. Lawson, some even admitting to their own unresolved high school hurts. As the night wore on, Emma found herself gravitating back towards Mr. Lawson. They stood side by side, looking out at the Chicago skyline that had inspired their artwork. "You know, Mr. Lawson said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I always wondered how things might have been different if I'd approached that day another way." Emma nodded, understanding the weight of what-ifs that came with time and reflection. "We can't change the past," she said, "but maybe we can reshape its meaning." Mr. Lawson smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "Indeed, and perhaps, if you're willing, we could explore that idea further. I'm involved in a community art project, and we could use someone with your talent and perspective." Emma felt a spark of excitement at the idea. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. As the reunion drew to a close, Emma took one last look at their collaborative piece. The bridge they had painted seemed to shimmer with possibility. She realized that this evening, meant to be a journey into the past, had unexpectedly opened a door to the future. Gathering her things, Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her. The reunion had brought not just closure, but a new beginning. As she said her goodbyes and stepped out into the Chicago night, she felt ready to cross the bridge from her past to whatever lay ahead. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a transformative journey that would challenge her perceptions, test her newfound peace, and ultimately lead to profound personal growth. The weeks following the reunion passed in a blur of activity for Emma. Her day job kept her busy, but her evenings were increasingly occupied with thoughts of the community art project Mr. Lawson had mentioned. After several email exchanges, they had agreed to meet at a local coffee shop to discuss the details. As Emma pushed open the door of the quaint cafe, the aroma of freshly ground coffee beans enveloped her. She spotted Mr. Lawson Thomas, as he'd asked her to call him, at a corner table, a portfolio spread out before him. "Emma," he greeted her warmly, standing to pull out a chair. "Thank you for coming." As they settled in, Emma couldn't help but notice how different this interaction felt from their charged encounters in high school. There was an ease between them now, born from their shared moment of vulnerability at the reunion. Thomas began to outline the community project, a series of murals designed to revitalize a struggling neighborhood. As he spoke, his passion for the work was evident, and Emma found herself drawn in by his enthusiasm. "The thing is," Thomas said, his tone becoming more serious, "this project is personal for me. It's in the neighborhood where I grew up, where I first discovered my love for history and art." Emma leaned in, intrigued. "I didn't know you had an interest in art," she said. Thomas smiled ruefully. "There's a lot about me you didn't know, Emma. Back when you were my student, I was going through some difficult times." He paused, seeming to wrestle with whether to continue. Emma waited, sensing that they were on the cusp of a revelation. "The year I had you in class," Thomas finally continued, "my wife had just been diagnosed with cancer. The school board was breathing down our necks about test scores, and I was struggling with my own sense of failure. As a teacher, as a husband, as an aspiring artist who never quite made it." Emma felt a jolt of surprise. "You wanted to be an artist?" Thomas nodded, a wistful look in his eyes. "It was my dream, much like it was yours, but life has a way of steering us down unexpected paths." As Thomas continued to share his story, Emma began to see her high school experience in a new light. The stern, sometimes harsh Mr. Lawson was replaced by a more complex figure, a man grappling with personal struggles while trying to maintain his professional facade. "That day," Thomas said, referring to the infamous critique that had haunted Emma for so long, "I saw in your work a raw talent that I once possessed. And I think my harsh words came from a place of jealousy and regret, not just disappointment in your project." Emma sat back, processing this new information. The hurt she had carried for so long began to transform, making room for understanding and even empathy. "Why are you telling me all this now?" she asked softly. Thomas met her gaze steadily. "Because I believe in honesty, Emma, and because I hope that by understanding the full context, you might find it easier to work with me on this project. Your talent and perspective would be invaluable." As they continued to discuss the project, Emma felt a shift in her perception. The man sitting across from her was no longer the intimidating figure from her past, but a fellow artist, a human being with his own struggles and regrets. By the time they parted ways, Emma had agreed to join the community art project. But more than that, she had gained a new understanding of her own journey. The words that had once nearly derailed her dreams now stood as a testament to her resilience. As she walked home through the bustling Chicago streets, Emma felt a sense of liberation. The truth, painful as it had been to unearth, had set her free from the last lingering doubts about her path. She realized that this project with Thomas wasn't just about creating art for a community. It was about healing, about second chances, and about the power of creativity to bridge the gaps between people and across time. With each step, Emma felt more certain of her decision. This collaboration promised to be more than just a professional endeavor. It was an opportunity for growth, for redemption, and for creating something beautiful out of the ashes of the past. Little did she know, the journey ahead would challenge her in ways she never expected, pushing her to confront not just her past, but her present and future as well. The community center buzzed with activity as Emma pushed open the heavy doors, her arms laden with art supplies. The space had been transformed into a makeshift studio, with large canvases propped against walls and tables covered in paints, brushes, and sketches. Thomas greeted her with a warm smile, helping her set down her load. "Welcome to our little art haven," he said, gesturing around the room. "What do you think?" Emma took in the scene, noticing the diverse group of people already at work, teenagers with bright hair and even brighter ideas, elderly residents sharing stories as they sketched, and everything in between. "It's amazing," she breathed, feeling a surge of excitement. As Thomas introduced her to the group, Emma felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. Here, she wasn't defined by her past or her professional achievements. She was simply another artist, ready to contribute to something larger than herself. Over the next few weeks, Emma found herself spending more and more time at the community center. The mural project had taken on a life of its own, with each participant bringing their unique perspective and experiences to the table. One afternoon, as Emma was helping a young girl mix colors, she overheard Thomas in conversation with an elderly gentleman. "You know, Tom," the man was saying, "when you first proposed this project, I thought you were crazy. But seeing all these people come together..." It's like watching the neighborhood come back to life. Thomas nodded, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Emma. Sometimes, Mr. Johnson, the craziest ideas are the ones that heal us the most. Their eyes met across the room, and Emma felt a flutter of understanding. This project wasn't just about revitalizing a neighborhood, it was about personal restoration as well. As the days passed, Emma and Thomas found themselves working side by side more often. Their artistic styles, once so different, began to complement each other in unexpected ways. Thomas's traditional techniques blended seamlessly with Emma's modern flair, creating something entirely new and captivating. During one of their painting sessions, Emma found the courage to broach a subject that had been on her mind. "Thomas," she began, her brush pausing mid-stroke, "I've been thinking about what you told me, about your struggles when I was in your class." Thomas set down his palette, giving Emma his full attention. "Yes. I want you to know that I understand now. And I forgive you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Thomas's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Thank you, Emma," he said softly. "That means more than you know." From that moment on, their relationship shifted. The last vestiges of teacher and student fell away, replaced by a partnership of equals, bound by shared passion and mutual respect. As the mural project progressed, Emma found herself opening up more, not just to Thomas, but to the entire community. She shared stories of her own struggles and triumphs, finding that her experiences resonated with many others. One evening, as the sun was setting and casting a golden glow through the community center windows, a local reporter stopped by to cover the project. As Emma explained the concept behind one of the murals, a phoenix rising from a cityscape, symbolizing renewal and hope, she caught sight of her reflection in a nearby mirror. The woman staring back at her was not the hurt teenager she had once been, nor was she the guarded professional she had become. Instead, she saw someone new, confident, compassionate, and fully embracing her artistic spirit. Later that night, as Emma and Thomas were cleaning up, he turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Emma, watching you these past weeks has been truly inspiring. You've not only embraced this project but have become its heart." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "This project, it's changed me, Thomas, in ways I never expected." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's the power of art, isn't it? It doesn't just change the world around us, it changes us too." As they stood there, surrounded by the fruits of their collective labor, Emma realized that they had indeed built a bridge, not just in their artwork, but between past and present, between hurt and healing. The community mural project was nearing its completion, but Emma sensed that her journey, their journey, was far from over. The bridges they had built were strong, spanning not just physical spaces, but emotional ones as well. As she left the community center that night, stepping out into the cool Chicago evening, Emma felt a sense of anticipation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth and connection. And for the first time in years, she was eager to face whatever lay ahead, paintbrush in hand and heart wide open. Little did she know, the most significant challenge and the most profound revelation was yet to come, waiting just around the corner to test the strength of the bridges they had built. The day of the mural unveiling arrived with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. The community center was abuzz with activity as final touches were added and preparations made for the evening's event. Emma arrived early, her heart racing with anticipation. As she walked through the space, admiring the collective work of the past weeks, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Each mural told a story, of struggle, of hope, of community. But it was the centerpiece, the large mural she and Thomas had collaborated on, that drew her attention. The mural depicted a vibrant cityscape, with bridges connecting diverse neighborhoods. In the foreground, a group of people of all ages and backgrounds worked together on a collective art piece. It was a powerful representation of their journey, both as a community and as individuals. Thomas appeared beside her, his eyes shining with pride. "It's quite something, isn't it?" he said softly. Emma nodded, unable to find words to express the emotions welling up inside her. As they stood there, taking in their creation, Emma felt a shift in the air between them. There was an unspoken understanding, a connection that went beyond their shared artistic vision. As the evening approached, guests began to arrive, community members, local officials, and even a few of Emma's former classmates who had heard about the project. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Just before the official unveiling, Thomas pulled Emma aside. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice low and serious. "Something I should have shared earlier, but I was afraid." Emma's brow furrowed with concern. "What is it, Thomas?" He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "Do you remember the art scholarship you applied for in your senior year? The one you didn't get?" Emma nodded slowly, confusion evident on her face. It had been a devastating blow at the time, coming on the heels of Thomas's harsh critique. "I was on the selection committee," Thomas confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I voted against your application." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Emma processed his words. "You... what? Why?" she managed to choke out. Thomas's eyes filled with remorse. "I thought I was protecting you. The art world can be cruel, and I believed that discouraging you would save you from future pain. But I was wrong, Emma. So terribly wrong." Emma took a step back, her mind reeling. All these years, she had believed that her application simply wasn't good enough. To learn that Thomas had played a role in that rejection, it felt like a betrayal. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "You've seen my work now. You know what I'm capable of. How could you have done that?" Thomas reached out, then thought better of it and let his hand fall to his side. "I was in a dark place then, Emma. Watching you with all your talent and passion, it reminded me of my own unfulfilled dreams. I made a decision based on my own fears and regrets, not on your abilities." Emma felt tears pricking at her eyes. The hurt teenager inside her wanted to lash out, to undo all the progress they had made. But the woman she had become, the artist who had flourished despite the obstacles, took a deep breath and really looked at Thomas. She saw not the stern teacher of her memories, but a man weighted down by years of regret, finally unburdening himself of a long-held secret. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Thomas gestured to the mural behind them. "Because of this. Because of who you've become despite my actions. You deserve to know the truth, and I needed to finally take responsibility for my mistakes." As Emma stood there, processing this revelation, she realized that this moment was a crossroads. She could let this information destroy the bridges they had built, or she could use it as the final piece in her journey of healing. The sound of the event coordinator calling for everyone's attention broke through their intense exchange. It was time for the unveiling. Emma looked at Thomas, seeing the fear and hope warring in his eyes. In that moment, she made a decision that would define not just this evening, but the course of her future. "We're not done with this conversation," she said firmly. "But right now, we have a mural to unveil. Are you ready?" Relief washed over Thomas's face, followed by determination. He nodded, squaring his shoulders. As they walked together towards the gathered crowd, Emma felt a strange mix of emotions: hurt, understanding, and a surprising sense of liberation. This revelation, painful as it was, had removed the last barrier between her past and her present. Standing before the community they had brought together, Emma and Thomas exchanged a look of shared resolve. Whatever came next, they would face it together, with honesty and courage. As the covers were pulled away from the murals, revealing their collective vision to the world, Emma realized that the true masterpiece wasn't on the walls. It was the journey of forgiveness, growth, and redemption that had brought them all to this moment. The applause that erupted was more than just appreciation for the art. It was a celebration of transformation, of a community, of relationships, and of the human spirit's capacity for change. The unveiling ceremony was a whirlwind of emotions for Emma. As she stood before the crowd, explaining the symbolism behind their murals, she felt a strange dichotomy within herself. On one hand, she was bursting with pride at what they had accomplished. On the other, Thomas's revelation weighed heavily on her mind. As the evening progressed, Emma found herself mechanically shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and answering questions from enthusiastic community members and local press. but her eyes kept drifting to Thomas, who was equally engaged across the room. It wasn't until the crowd had thinned and the last of the guests were leaving that Emma and Thomas found themselves alone again, standing before their collaborative mural. "I owe you more than just an apology," Thomas began, his voice thick with emotion. "I owe you an explanation, and probably a lifetime of making amends." Emma turned to face him, her expression a complex mix of hurt and understanding. "You're right, you do owe me that. But not here, not now. This moment, this achievement, it's bigger than just us and our past." Thomas nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "You're right, of course. You've always had a wisdom beyond your years, Emma." They agreed to meet the following day at a quiet cafe to have the conversation they both knew was long overdue. The next morning, as Emma walked to the cafe, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The hurt teenager, the driven professional, the artist rediscovering her passion. All these versions of herself seemed to converge in this moment. Thomas was already there when she arrived, 2 steaming cups of coffee on the table before him. As Emma sat down, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the worry lines etched deep in his face. "I've spent years trying to rationalize what I did," Thomas began without preamble. "But the truth is, there's no justification for it. I let my own insecurities and fears cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I nearly derailed the career of one of the most talented students I've ever had." Emma listened silently, allowing Thomas to unburden himself. He spoke of his own failed artistic aspirations, of the pressure he felt as an educator, of the personal struggles that had colored his perspective during that time. As he talked, Emma felt the last vestiges of resentment she had been holding on to begin to crumble. In its place, a profound sense of empathy took root. When Thomas finally fell silent, Emma took a deep breath. "Thank you for your honesty," she said softly. "I won't pretend that what you did didn't hurt me deeply. It did. But I also can't ignore the fact that that hurt pushed me to work harder, to prove myself not just to you, but to myself." Thomas looked up, surprise evident in his eyes. Emma continued, "I've realized something through this whole experience. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing to move forward unburdened by it." She reached across the table, placing her hand over Thomas's. "I forgive you, Thomas. Not just for what you said in class all those years ago, but for the scholarship too. I forgive you because holding on to that hurt doesn't serve either of us anymore." Tears welled up in Thomas's eyes, mirroring the emotion Emma felt welling up within herself. "Where do we go from here?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. "Forward," she said simply. "We go forward. There's still so much good we can do, so much art we can create. If you're willing, I'd like to continue working together." As they sat there, in that quiet cafe, Emma felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The bridges they had built, through their art, through their honesty, through their willingness to confront the past, were strong. Strong enough to support whatever the future might hold. The triumph of forgiveness wasn't just in the act itself, but in the possibilities it opened up. As Emma and Thomas began to discuss future projects, their eyes alight with renewed passion and shared vision, it was clear that this was not an ending, but a new beginning. 6 months after the mural unveiling, Emma stood before a group of eager students in the newly renovated art wing of Oakwood High School. The walls were adorned with vibrant artwork, including a scaled-down version of the community mural she and Thomas had created. "Art isn't just about technique or talent," Emma explained, her voice filled with passion. "It's about courage. The courage to express yourself, to be vulnerable, to connect with others through your work." As she spoke, her eyes met Thomas's. He stood at the back of the classroom, a proud smile on his face. Their collaboration had extended beyond the community project, leading to a series of workshops and mentorship programs for aspiring young artists. The journey hadn't been easy. There were moments of doubt, of old hurts resurfacing. But with each challenge, the bonds they had forged grew stronger. Their story of reconciliation and growth had inspired not just the students, but the entire community. As the class ended and the students filed out, chattering excitedly about their upcoming projects, Thomas approached Emma. "You never cease to amaze me," he said warmly. "Watching you with these students, it's like seeing the future of art unfold before my eyes." Emma smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment she had once thought impossible. "We're building something special here, aren't we?" Thomas nodded, his eyes twinkling. "Indeed we are. And to think, it all started with an invitation to a high school reunion." As they walked out of the classroom together, discussing plans for their next community art initiative, Emma felt a profound sense of gratitude. The path that had led her here had been winding and sometimes painful, but every step had been necessary. The future stretched out before them, a blank canvas full of possibilities. And Emma knew, with unwavering certainty, that whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them, paintbrush in hand, heart open, and with the strength of forgiveness and understanding as her guide. As they stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, Emma realized that this wasn't just a new chapter in her life. It was a masterpiece in the making, one brushstroke at a time. I really hope you enjoyed the story. Please leave a comment with your views. I'm sure there will be new videos on this channel that will thrill you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. Until next time.